For years, Waterloo Region has been known globally for its tech, its software, its startups, and its innovation. But there's been a quiet transition that's happening for some companies. Call it a new frontier or potentially just a new option, but more companies around the region are starting to get very interested in defense and security. Just last month, the Canadian government announced that it's moving towards 2% GDP spend on defense. This is a roadmap that gets us to Cold War era defense spending of 5% GDP by 2035. Put that in layman's terms, it's $150 billion annually. And for companies in the region that are focused in defense or potentially have things that they would like to sell to the military, it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Today, we're going to be talking about the defense sector that exists in Waterloo Region, some of the companies that are moving into this sector, and where this could potentially go.
But Tony, I want to start with you because there's actually a conversation that I had with you that really got me starting to think about the region and what defense means. And this was a little over a year ago. It was for a story about the Trump tariffs and what that meant for our auto sector. You brought up at that point this commitment towards a 5% GDP spend and what that could mean. You were just about to go to Germany. But maybe talk me through in terms of what the actual defense sector and the dual use sector looks like in the region right now, and why you think there is a real opportunity for it to grow here.
Yeah, it's great when things come together as planned, right? You know, and it illustrates that when there's a national response to a threat, there's also a lot of opportunity. And so, around the time that the federal government launched its defense industrial strategy, we started work on building, and we're still doing it, a Waterloo Region defense/dual-use cluster map or asset map. So we had a sense of, the companies that were in the space already, that were migrating to the space. And it's really important because it's a starting point, right? What are we actually trying to do? There's big money being spent already. Like this year alone in the federal budget, it's like $86 billion, spending $150 billion more before 2035. And what it looks like is a work in progress. And by that I mean, even at the roundtable we had here, there were 9 or 10 companies from across the region. Earlier this week I visited a company, maybe I'll bring it to life with an example. There's a Waterloo company with some great founders that are actually building a micro-nuclear reactor, and they're doing it here. Yeah, and it's in the category of holy crap, that's incredible. And it is a company called CSMC Labs, and that is a Canadian mission, a Canadian Strategic Missions Corporation. And this is a company that, like, if you think about the Arctic and patrolling the Arctic, for example, about 80% of the power will come from diesel, right? Diesel generation. And imagine the ability to replace that with a microreactor, right? And so this is work that's going on, being supported by the federal government, provincial governments. And we have a range of companies from across, a number of key disciplines on the, kind of using physical AI to move up the value chain. There's another local company called the BizLink Elocab that actually makes, right now they make cables for, and this is a great example of dual use, they make cables for semiconductor manufacturing, they make cables for endoscopy and for rail car connections. Now, and this is a company that is involved in actually making the cables for our submarines. So, and they're partnered with global companies. So around the time that this strategy was launched, Waterloo Region Economic Development Corporation developed new investment support guidelines. So we took a hard look at the companies that we support, and we recalibrated where we were going to focus. And we were prioritizing Canadian-controlled corporations. We're prioritizing manufacturing and R&D that actually happens here, where Canadian companies and Waterloo Region companies will benefit. It doesn't mean that we're not going to work with international companies. They're still important, but the world has changed and we have to meet the moment. So that's just one example. So that our asset map is in development. We're learning every day about new companies, and it's a very exciting time.
Sheldon, I want to get your thoughts on why Waterloo Region specifically has this opportunity to build something like this. There's obviously tech companies that exist here, but we have the university, we have manufacturing capability. I mean, what is special about this place that maybe can jump on this in a way that other areas can't?
The opportunity for Waterloo Region, I think, comes down to predominantly two things. Number one is talent, technical talent in cutting edge, frontier areas such as the quantum ecosystem, but also in engineering broadly. So the degree to which we can mobilize the incredible talent that this region has to meet the moment, as Tony said, that's number one. Number two is we have manufacturing base and industrial capacity, know-how in a traditional sector that's going to be called upon to meet the moment. So the two of those things are assets that we have in the region, and they're things that the country needs of us at this time. So I think collectively we want to kind of step up to the plate and find ways to support the country's defense imperative.
Grief, I want to ask you about the dual use consortium, because I think this is extremely interesting and it's growing extensively. But tell me how this started and essentially what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's a fascinating group. We actually just had our meeting today. We do a monthly meeting, and we had 3 new members join this month. And so we started with 8 companies. So 8 companies that were looking for sort of to come out of the shadows to say, like, hey, we do work in defense, you do work in defense, maybe there's a way that we could work together or we could learn from each other. And the environment has changed so much recently that even a year ago, saying you were doing work in defense was something that people would say quietly. But now, because of the fact that these Canadian innovators are supporting Canadian demand for protecting our people, protecting our data, protecting our borders, they're now sort of able to come out and now build these networks. So we started with 8 companies. Literally on our first day, there were companies in the room that were like, oh, I didn't know you did that. Oh, I didn't know you did that. And they were able to collaborate on projects that they just didn't know we had those capabilities. So we're now up to about 50 members in the Waterloo region. They're all products in market today, pretty much all products in market today. Some are in defense, some are moving into defense. And it blows me away every time these folks get together in a room, because the innovation that they're working on is actually really inspirational. And now you add the fact that they believe in the mission of the Canadian government protecting Canadians, and that they're able to contribute, even like we are able to contribute to that. Ottawa seems like quite a distance down the road sometimes, but it's just not. We actually live in a small country, if you want to call that. It's the fact that we can contribute to this mission is, I think, really important to a lot of us. And the more visibility we get on the capabilities that we have here, I think the more opportunities will come up for these technologies to be used by the people that need them.
Yeah, what Ruth said is insightful. If you think about it, we celebrated 2 weeks ago the production of 65,000 assault rifles made in Kitchener, right? And talk about how the
might
world
want
has
to
changed.
done that a while ago.
We probably would have done that a year ago, but suddenly we care what assault rifles and advanced capabilities our servicemen and women are using on the field. They're manufactured here in Kitchener.
And I think there's 2 sort of layers to that sort of dual use and the potential for the region. Like there's the cases of the people who are sort of available today to make things that are relevant for the military and for Canada's defense. There's also like, what does the future defense industrial base look like? And how do we create the next generation of technologies that will be advanced capabilities that will give us give our people that advantage in the field? And I think that's the second element, right? There's this kind of immediate, what can we do like right now to repurpose or build things that are relevant right now? But I think there's also this element of this region has this innovation sort of history, and I think is how can we build the innovative next generation of these defense technologies? And I think that's what we see from quantum, right? Quantum's not going to be a product tomorrow that's going to roll into the armed forces that easily, but the thing is you want to build those things now so that a year, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, we have this sort of pipeline of these new companies being created here that will deliver these technologies to our forces and to our allies.
I was speaking with a local founder a couple of weeks ago who operates in the dual use space. They talked about 5 years ago, they were focused essentially 80% on civilians, 20% on defense. Today, with their new product offering, it's flipped completely. They're now 80% defense. Are you hearing that kind of across the board from a lot of different companies? And is there any concerns potentially about going this deep into the defense sector?
I don't know if I've heard that specifically. It's going to depend on every company and what their market is and what they're going after. The appetite is definitely there from the Canadian government at this point and from our allies. So I think for the foreseeable future, it's probably a safe business plan. The military and defense spaces don't buy products easily. So if they're buying them, they truly believe in the value of what they're purchasing. Markets change, and as an ex-entrepreneur myself, you have to be able to adjust to the market. So I think our founders are, in most cases, pretty on top of that, and they understand, where, at least to the extent that we can, where the market's going and how they're going to adjust to that. I think that's great news if that's the case for them. So
They have to follow the money to build the company. Right? That's really important, and it aligns very nicely with what the country needs. And as we said, the defense sector is not an easy sector to sell into. So if you are part of that supply chain as a subcontractor, or even as kind of disruptive new technology, it's a great way to build, right? And I think Sheldon would probably agree that it's a great time for founders who are looking at getting in that space.
The Canadian government's also forging ahead with plans with the European Union, with NATO, and making it easier in theory for companies to be able to sell in those markets. Is that another thing that you're seeing and trying to kind of help these companies get into?
Yeah, there's a balance. I think sometimes I think the doors are open, right? For sure. Like we've done some work with NATO. I know there's NATO Diana as an accelerator that helps people sort of get access to the NATO purchasing ecosystem. One of the things I think we also expect our government to move quickly, so that you want our government to be the first reference customer, and then they help sell it to the rest of the defense ecosystem, right? Because that's always a question. It's like, why won't Canada buy it? I mean, you go to Sweden or Norway or somewhere else first, right? So there's definitely a push there to have our government lead some of those things to support our companies, but the door's open to go be in the ecosystem with all our allied partners, even with the U.S., right? Like it's complicated, but there's opportunities there as well, right? Via their programs and their interest. If it's good technology and it's going to give advantage or be better than what's available, I think people will listen to you.
Historically, has it been challenging to get into the other markets around the world? And what types of challenges stood in the way from companies maybe doing that?
I think the answer is it might have actually been easier to get into some of those other countries than it was to get into the Canadian government. And so I think the change that you're talking about is that Canada is open to being an early customer, whereas I think a lot of our companies would say it was the other way around in the past, that once you sold to other countries, then you could sell to Canada. And so I think it's a great direction that Canada is more willing to become an earlier adopter than they have been traditionally.
I would say, as much as I do believe that generally that has been the case, there's also a group of very successful local companies that are winning, in the U.S., that are winning in the Middle East and winning in Europe, and there's concern that they have that all the Buy Canada rhetoric will actually work against them in the long run, because if every country were to turn to only its domestic innovators, well, that means we've got about 2.5% of global GDP here for them to sell into first. So as much as we do need to take measures, I think, as a country to find ways to ensure that our domestic innovators have capability to sell here locally, I think we want to be mindful that a world that is open and one where there's as much, to the extent that fair competition still exists, which I hope it does, although that's a complicated topic we could get into, we don't want to create conditions where our domestic innovators are going to be locked out inadvertently of some markets where they're actually winning in today. So it's a complicated, difficult time, I would say, for us to thread that needle.
I think where it gets even more complicated, though, is in areas like sovereign compute, right? Where a domestic capability is critically important for the future of the country, right? So in areas like that, we've got to choose our partners very carefully, and the strategic part of strategic procurement becomes really important, right? And so, not surprisingly, where data resides and how it's used has a very, very different lens in 2026 than it would have even in 2023 or 2024, right? And that's in large part because of your concerns over the Patriot Act and concerns about, Canadian-controlled corporations that actually own, government data centers or even private data centers. So it's evolving. It is it's a period where I agree with Sheldon that we have to be global traders, free flow of capital, free flow of ideas, but we can't be Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts when it comes to intellectual property. And we, given all of the non-tariff barriers that have existed in Europe and in Asia and in the United States, we've got to up our game to make sure that Canadian companies are given the pole position. That's my take.
If I could add one thing to that, I think, again, right now in the global landscape, being Canadian is a great thing for our companies in terms of being able to sell internationally. And so, it's a bit of the seize the day moment, I think, right now, because we have the technology, we have the capabilities, and we have the reputation. And so I think, and government support. So I think those are some amazing checkboxes that have changed significantly over the last year.
Also, over the last year, there was, the Carney Davos speech, the uniting of middle powers. I wonder how that's trickling down the ecosystem to the companies that are navigating it. Are we actually seeing any sort of shift, and is there an opening of middle markets that maybe didn't exist before?
I think
It's kind of early.
Well, I think it's an interesting topic because, for most of us in the sort of founder tech space, it would be nice if we were all like founders are focused on their business and growing their business, right? Like that is what they are doing. We all have to be aware of what's going on in the world and how what we're doing impacts the world, but it's probably not the day-to-day for most founders to be thinking about how the Davos speech affects their ability to sell into some country. But I think the reality, it is and it does, right? And so I think that's what a lot of us do is spend time on making sure that we've positioned our companies and our capabilities so that when government folks are thinking about what do we do next and how do we do it next and what does it mean for middle powers to unite, that they're saying, oh, well, actually we can do that by adopting some of these technologies or, so it's a great speech.
I think that goes to policy too at the federal government level to engage and deal with some of the things that Sheldon brought up is making sure those barriers aren't there for our folks to be able to engage with those countries and sell into those countries easily and participate in programs. Like I see a lot of, programs with, a range of countries, Canada this, Canada that, Canada. I see export development being very aggressive. Like I do see, maybe like, it's become a policy priority for some of these things to take place. So I think, the machine's moving in that direction. I think, it'll take time, but I think, the framework is there that we should be engaging, or Canadian organizations or regional organizations should be taking advantage of these things to engage in those countries. If you have a solution that fits our army and fits somebody else's army, right, play that game. The one thing that comes into that is export controls and regulations, and, the Europeans are, fear any ITAR sort of restrictions on technology and things like that. So this sovereign supply chain question and relationships become really important if you're going to provide products into some of those other countries.
There still has a potential, though. If you think about nuclear, again, I'll mention that, and you think about Germany. I was just at an event with the Consul General. We had the mayors of Kitchener, Cambridge, and Waterloo there. And Germany made a strategic decision to basically wind up its nuclear program a number of years ago, and now that's it's coming home to roost. And what better way to kind of cement Canadian, German sort of industrial relations with bets placed on our nuclear technology? It makes a lot of sense. We have companies like Westinghouse that are 100% Canadian owned and controlled, with some great technology. We've got a range of companies in that space. And on the Davos speech, you could sum it up by saying middle powers have long recognized that we like each other, right? We shared values, and we shared kind of our challenges globally under kind of this big hegemon, the United States. I don't even think Trump knows what hegemon is.
I was going to say, that's a good word.
Yeah. Well, I think he thinks is it a Pokemon?
I don't know.
Yeah. But seriously, we now recognize that we need each other. Over and above liking each other, we actually need each other. And, it's early days. And that's the thing. It's an exciting time. And the months and years ahead will tell the tale.
Over the last, 2 months now, we've had a number of high-profile members of the government in the defense sector that have stopped by. Your minister here, the defense minister was here as well. I've been working here for 6 years. I don't remember anything like that happening. This seems to signal that there is at least a nod that Waterloo Region and its companies are on the radar. Is that the read that you're getting as well?
I think Secretary Fuhr called us a defense hub when he was here. Again, I think some of it is folks coming out of the shadows and being able to say, this is what we can do to help the mission that we are on as Canadians protecting Canada. And I think that the more visibility we have on the capabilities of the region, the more it's recognized that, yeah, there's something special here. I don't know, I think they just come for the weather.
I think there's also a volume of that because it's now one of the top 3 or 4 strategic priorities for the federal government, right? Be it houses, critical infrastructure, defense, are there. And defense also drags or pulls a whole bunch of economic development, right? Defense is not going to be measured purely on defense. It's going to be measured on the job creation and the opportunities created in the economy as a result of it. And so I think, a year ago, there just wasn't the money in the system to think about these things. And we've kind of gone from starvation to almost gluttony in terms of the opportunities. And I think managing that effectively is critical. And I think people in regions that put their hands up and be aggressive, I think will see benefit from it, right? I think that's a really important thing. There is going to be money in the system, be it, big purchases of subs and the supply chain impacts of that, or over-the-horizon radar, or all these things kind of coming together. There's opportunities for people to really put their hand up and get engaged and grab a piece of that action.
One of the things I've been speaking about with founders is the fact that they realize that there's an ecosystem here where some companies do things well, other companies do other things well, and as they attempt to put in bids, they can potentially be working together on these bids. Is that something you're hearing as well? And could that be a real possibility for this region as well?
I think that is one of the outcomes that I personally hope is coming out and will continue to come out of the dual use technology group. It's happening already. Literally from our first meeting, it's been happening. I think I have never actually done a defense bid myself. I don't know if anyone else here has, but these are big contracts with a lot of different aspects. And so most of our companies are SMBs, they're small to medium businesses. They can't necessarily do everything themselves, but with partnerships they can, and collaborations they can. We're seeing a lot of it.
The government also pushes for that. Either the primes get pushed to bring in ecosystem players, or even in the sort of the bids around it's always about collaboration, I think, because I think there isn't, they look to the primes, I think, the government, to be sort of the system integrators. And then if you've got an individual technology, you got to figure out where you intercept that program or that bigger, programs are 10 years long and $10 billion, right? A small SME is not going to win that program. What they have a chance to do is intercept that program, provide critical capability that could give them a 10-year lifespan of product or 10 plus years of product solution and support, right? So you gotta, but that comes with needing partners.
When the primes are not Canadian, like for example, submarines, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's Japanese companies that do it, you know, Korean companies, others. You know, the government actually requires the primes to dole out industrial and technology benefits equivalent to the value of the contract. So they will actually actively go out and seek Canadian suppliers for their program. So because we don't make everything in Canada, right? There are some, you know, whether it's fighter jets or submarines, and so that's kind of a very timely kind of call to action for a range of companies, small, medium-sized, even you know, growing, scaling companies, to join a supply chain, demonstrate their capabilities. So it's a very exciting time.
If I could make one more comment on the collaboration, just as an example, we have a company in our dual use group. It's Pegasus Aeronautics. They had a circumstance where they were testing some of their drones. They fly drones up in the Arctic. And so through this group, their CEO was very kind to say to everyone else in the group, if anyone else has sensors or things that they need tested in the Arctic, you give them to me, we'll add them to our drones, and we'll test them while we're in the Arctic. Like, what an amazing collaboration opportunity that was. Because, you know, not all of us go to the Arctic every day, luckily. But, you know, it's just about growing the capabilities of the region and the capabilities of your peers. Like, it's collaborative, it's not competitive, it's, you know, it's the whole rising ships thing. But, you know, that just warms my heart as a facilitator that we're able to support each other that way.
The ethos of the community water region, practical, engineered, entrepreneurial, collaborative. There is no better set of attributes to describe a community at this particular time, given the imperative in defense. So if it just reinforces, or there's so many reasons to be optimistic. Like, the country, I think, is lucky to have the assets that Waterloo Region has, and at the same time, like, it's a responsibility for us collectively as a community to step up and meet the need that the country has. So very optimistic. I think we've got the people, the entrepreneurs, the talent, the builders that the country needs, and you know, they need to know that there are a lot of folks in their corner that are supporting.
You know, is there the potential here that in 10 years, when people think of the Waterloo region, they think of you know, first a strong defense sector? I mean, what is the actual possibilities of what could be built here?
The possibilities are really exciting. I'm not going to start saying that we're in the money in terms of defense, but you will forgive me if I smile with confidence. You know, 10 years from now, having a number of anchor companies in the defense space that, you know, eclipse new technologies, you know, that require manufacturing that is kind of state of the art, that could all happen here, incorporating kind of where quantum is headed and incorporating what's happening in physical AI. You know, Waterloo Region could be an important national hub of that universe and globally significant. And I think we already are, but very exciting time for us to build. There's a lot of work to do. So I would say that, you know, defense as an anchor sector in this community is likely to happen.
Yeah, I think I'll build on that. Yeah, I think 10 years from now, we want to have, you know, this industrial base, this defense industrial base anchored around Waterloo that is delivering these, you know, this kind of new generation of defense technologies, right? And it's not just the Canadian Armed Forces. It's, you know, to our, you know, we have world-leading capabilities in that ecosystem that are being delivered to all our allies as well. Like, we're known for certain defense technologies, and maybe that's in the areas of the new emerging technologies, AI or quantum or along those areas. But there's an opportunity there that nobody has that in these new technologies yet. So why not us, right? Why not build that here with the strengths of the organizations and the capabilities and the talent we have here? Why can't that be us in 10 years? And if not, it's going to be somewhere else, right? And so we need to do it here if we want to really drive forward with that vision.
I think if you picked almost any industry and took the focus that is currently on defense, like from an international, national, regional level, you could take almost any industry and the capabilities of the regional Waterloo could make that be a thing for 10 years out. I don't know if that sentence made sense, but we have a lot of capabilities here.
Sure do.
The fact is, right now, defense is a big focus. And so some of what is happening in the Waterloo region, again, is just people coming out of the shadows for work they've already done and technologies that they already have. Or it's minor modifications to technology that they have to make it applicable to the defense space. Just as a quick example, we had a company that had a product, but there was glass in the product, and in order to make it rugged enough for the military space, they had to replace that with some sort of plastic. So it's minor modification to the technology that they have. So existing companies coming out of the woodwork, technology that exists already with modifications can be used in that space, and then add on, like, what is the future of technology? I am confident that the Waterloo region has the ability to deliver on whatever that future of technology is, along with the ecosystem supports, the manufacturing supports, the global visibility, the reputation of Canada in general, and this is a great place to be, both for technology companies and hopefully for all of the different aspects of Canada and protecting the things that we need to protect as Canadians.